Michael, and I am so glad to be with you today. It's Saturday morning, and I love spending time with you today. And today we're going to continue our conversation, Joseph, and the lessons that we can learn from his life. Now, yesterday we were talking about how that Joseph was able to interpret Pharaoh's dream. And in one moment, he was turned or transformed from prisoner to prime minister. Now we're going to talk about the time where he basically organized and also as well, got ready for the famine. If you remember when we were talking yesterday, Pharaoh had a dream, and the dream actually had two components. He had two dreams. And the first dream was about healthy cows and cows that were starving. And the starving cows actually ate the healthy cows. And then he had a second dream where there were stalks of wheat. There was good stalks of wheat and bad stalks of wheat, and the bad stalks of wheat ate the good stalks of wheat. He asked all the magicians and all the priests and all the different, people that could say that they could look into the spiritual realm, and none of them could interpret the dream. That's when Joseph arrived on the scene and interpreted the dream and gave Pharaoh a plan of action, of actually having someone oversee those 7 years of good or plenty and to get ready for the 7 years of famine. And all the officials of Egypt thought that Joseph was a perfect choice. And so in one day, Joseph was transformed from prisoner to prime minister. Well, now we're going to talk about that time where he was in Egypt for the 7 years of plenty. So here he is. He is promoted to second in command in one day. Now, Pharaoh obviously saw something in Joseph that, of course, the warden had seen and Potiphar had seen. And one of those little asides that I was thinking about was what would have happened to Potiphar's wife and Potiphar when all of a sudden they saw this prisoner, this individual that they had put into prison, and also as well an individual that had been in their household. All of a sudden, he is the prime minister. Now, I want you to notice something about Joseph here. Joseph was not a vengeful man. Joseph was a man who walked in forgiveness. Now, we don't know what happened to Potiphar or Potiphar's wife, but we do know this. Later on, Joseph would display incredible grace. And one of the things that we do know from Joseph's character is that the Lord was with him. And when the Lord is with you and you have a relationship with him, one of the first things that happens is you practice instantaneous forgiveness. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 5, he says, or 6, I should say, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Now, many people call this the golden rule, but basically, Jesus talked about in Matthew chapter 6 about the fact that we are to walk in forgiveness. And he said this, if you are not willing to forgive people who have wronged or offend you, then God will not forgive you because you are not practicing what he practices, which is, of course, instantaneous forgiveness. It doesn't matter what we do. God will forgive us if we ask for it. So that's a very important point. Joseph demonstrated that as well. We have no record in, of course, the Bible that says that he sought revenge against Potiphar or against Potiphar's wife. Joseph was a much bigger, magnanimous type of individual. He did not allow those little problems that go on in life. People are always going to say something bad about you, no matter how good you are, no matter how wonderful you are, no matter how gracious you are. There are just certain people that you're never going to be able to please. So don't live your life pleasing people. You know, Paul said in Galatians chapter 1, he says, I am not a man pleaser. He says, I'm a God pleaser. And he says, I want to demonstrate in my life, these types of principles. Love is patient, love is kind. Those type of things are the things that we should be demonstrating, not just once in a while, but on a daily basis. Because the reality of the situation is, if you are in a family dynamic, or you have friends, or you are in a work situation, the chance of not being offended on a daily basis is actually zero or very slim. So basically, you have to choose right away how you're going to react to wrong, how you're going to react to misunderstanding, how you're going to react to being offended or hurt. You've got to choose to be a person that's walks in forgiveness. You've got to be the better, bigger person. Don't slip down to someone's level. I want to tell you a little story about myself. I was going through an interesting time back in 1994, and I was talking to an individual on the phone, and he was baiting me. He was trying to get me to get angry, and I wasn't getting angry. Finally, he said, why don't you just blow up? So I did. I told him off. He felt better. I felt better for a short time. Then I realized, you know what? I gave in to simple, baiting, and afterwards I felt terrible about what I'd done. He had pulled me down to his level. Don't ever let that happen. Make sure that you always take the higher ground. And that's one of the lessons that we learn from Joseph, is the fact that even though in one day he went from prisoner to prime minister, he did not seek revenge on those, of course, who hurt him or offended him. He was a much bigger person. And secondly, he had a much bigger job to do. Now, the president of the United States right now seems to be obsessed with, of course, going after any person that went after him. Now, you have to understand, the president of the United States for 4 years was, of course, trolled. He was misunderstood. And now that he has absolute power, he is going to use it, because unfortunately, he is not a nice person, unfortunately, in most cases. Now, from time to time, he does show some real good qualities. But if you follow his posts on social media, you know he's attacking everybody who attacks him. And that's not a good way to live. You are not being magnanimous. You are not being graceful. You are not being loving or kind when you do that. And so it's important not to go down to the level of other people. You have to realize that you have to live in, of course, grace. And you also must not allow anyone to pull you into their confused world. Because as soon as you get pulled into a confused world, guess what? Everything gets confusing. So it's important that you display the same kind of characteristics that Joseph displayed. Now, Joseph understood that he was given a great responsibility. And he also understood that this responsibility was given to him by God. It was only the Lord that elevated him from prisoner to prime minister in one day. And he understood that. And he also understood the responsibility that he had been given. So Joseph gets right to work. And what does he do? Well, we do know that according to the Bible, and also as well, they were checking out the ancient ruins of Amaris. Now, remember, I talked about yesterday about the fact that the new king was part of the Hishkosh Empire. They were the ones that were people from another part of the area, and they had been able to dispossess and also take over the leadership of Egypt from the old dynasty. There was what they call the old dynasties and the new dynasties. And the Hishkosh people would rule for about 400 years as a people, okay? And then they would be replaced by or overthrown by an old dynasty just before Moses and he came into power, okay, and did all of that. So anyway, so this new Pharaoh, of course, was a progressive thinker, and he saw something in, of course, Joseph that nobody else saw. Now, they ruled in a city called Amaris. And when they were in that city, they found that there were large storage facilities. And in those storage facilities, they believed that these were the same storage facilities that um, Joseph had built, because the Bible says that he went throughout different cities in the country of Egypt, and he put large storage facilities in there so that they would be able to get the surplus of all the grain and all the produce that, of course, was needed during to be able to offset the famine. So Joseph goes right to work. And the first thing that the king said, you need a wife. And so he gets this beautiful young lady that's part of the royal family, and he gives her to Joseph as a wife. Secondly, during those 7 years of plenty, he has two sons. These two sons would actually become part of the tribes and inheritance of Israel. The oldest one was Ephraim, the youngest one was Manasseh. And so he had two sons. And during this time, he was very busy. He was going throughout the area. He was gathering all the produce, all the grain, all that was needed to be able to get ready for, of course, the famine. And he was very, very progressive. He was a builder. He was an administrator. He was an organizer. And this is what he was doing during that time. It was a time of prosperity. It was a time of abundance. It was a time where everything was flowing, going just exactly as Pharaoh's dream was, of course, saying it was going to happen. What was happening during that time is that what Pharaoh saw in his dreams was coming to pass. And that is something that we must not, in the ancient world, they understood the power of the dream. Now, as I talked about yesterday, there have been extensive studies and extensive documentaries and extensive surveys on dreams, and there are entire corporations that are all dedicated to, of course, the dream and what we do at night when we sleep. I mean, they now know that you can go into, you start off with the light sleep, and then you go into a deep sleep, and then they go into that area which is called the REM sleep, and that's where you dream. And some people can do it almost instantaneously. I know, for example, in my life, I can be sleeping in an afternoon, fall asleep, and all of a sudden I find myself dreaming. And so that's kind of an interesting thing. And there are other people out there who hardly ever dream. But it is quite a science. And in the ancient world, of course, they believed that it was a portal into the supernatural and also into the subconscious. Now, also as well, many of those dream experts and those who are sleep experts say that when a person dreams, what your mind is doing, what your brain is doing is, reorganizing everything during the subconscious time that you're sleeping so that you can get ready for the next day. And if, as you well know, if you don't get a good sleep, the next day is not a very good day. In fact, they tell us that we should have between 6 and 8 hours of sleep every night. And so to be healthy, if you have less than that, well, you're kind of running on 50% or 30%, whatever it is. So I always recommend getting a good night's sleep. So anyway, Joseph is very busy. He is administrating the world's greatest empire, and he is getting ready for the next phase. He knows that he has 7 years to get everything organized. Now, the interesting fact was the Bible says that during those 7 years, they stopped accounting. In the ancient world, of course, they were very, very meticulous when it came to their court records. It's just like today. There, many people, of course, love to know how things are going, and that's okay. And so what happened was, of course, they kept records, but there was so much abundance that they just no longer gave any records. And now the interesting thing about the Egyptian climate. Now, the Egyptian climate is actually a desert-like climate. Even though Egypt has all of these green spaces are basically close to the Nile River. You get about 2 or 3 miles away from the Nile River on either side. You could be the west side or the east side. All of a sudden, you're dealing with massive amounts of desert. Like if you watch these different movies about, of course, Egypt, if you find yourself in the Valley of the Kings, or you find yourself in the area of Giza, where they have, of course, the giant pyramids, it's desert. And the reason why is because the Sahara Desert, which is the largest desert in Africa and is actually growing every single year, the that is what Egypt is. It borders on, of course, the Sahara Desert, and that part of Africa is actually mostly desert. And so it is only along the Nile River where, of course, is the largest or the longest river in the world. It's not the largest river in the world when it comes to the volume of water. This is just an interesting fact. The um, Amazon River is, of course, the second largest river in the world, but it also has the largest volume of water in the world. The second largest water volume in the world is actually a river in my country of Canada, which is called the Mackenzie. The Mackenzie River, which I have been on, of course, is a river that is about half a mile wide for 2,300 miles and is the second largest river in the world when it comes to volume of water. And it is fed by this is interesting, most of the, I live on the Rocky Mountain side of Alberta, okay? Which basically means that all these giant rivers, like there is the Old Man River, there is the Elbow and the Bow River, there is the North Saskatchewan, there is the Athabasca River, there is the Peace River. These are large rivers in Canada that go up into Lake Athabasca, and then Lake Athabasca is the feeding ground of all the what they would call the Slave River. And the Slave River runs into the Great Slave Lake. The Great Slave Lake is fed by many other northern rivers. And then the main river that runs into, of course, the Arctic Ocean is the Mackenzie River. And it is totally navigable from the Great Slave Lake right into the Arctic Ocean. And that's just a little aside there, okay? Now, Joseph, of course, is creating all these great big storage facilities, and he knows that he has a certain amount of time to complete his task, and he is diligent about it. And the officials of Egypt, the Pharaoh, can see that everything that was talked about and predicted in Pharaoh's dream was coming to pass. And during that time, Joseph, of course, had his family, and he was getting ready because they all knew that the famine was coming. So, what do you do? And this is our little lesson for today, okay? When you find yourself in a time of prosperity, when you find yourself in a time of success, when you find yourself in a time of abundance, that's when you store things aside. Any particular investment broker of their soul will always tell you that you need to put money aside for, of course, retirement. Those times where, of course, you may or may not know this because it often happens. And I have discovered in my relationship with God, this is the beautiful thing about having a relationship with God. I have discovered that even before I have a need, God always supplies, which is absolutely marvelous. And so I just want you to know that Joseph understood that. And we also have lots of examples from nature that teach us. For example, you have in my area where I live, I have just outside my window here, I have 5 or 6 large evergreens. And these evergreens every year produce a whole bunch of cones. And in my backyard, I have squirrels that run around. And what are they doing? They're grabbing the cones and they're putting them somewhere, hopefully not in my house anywhere, but they are busy getting ready for winter. I have some anthills in my yard, unfortunately, which I have to deal with. But what are these ants doing? They are getting ready for winter. When you have, for example, around my area, we have a lot of what we would call duck ponds and sloughs where, ducks and geese, Canada geese is one of the big things that we have up here. What are these? They are laying eggs and they are raising their young and getting them ready for, of course, winter, because in our part of the world, we have all these different waterfowl that come and birds that fly from north to south. Even here in the province of Alberta, we have what is called the monarch butterfly. That is a beautiful butterfly that basically it is here in Alberta, and it comes and it's a beautiful part of our national identity during the summer, and then it flies south to Mexico to winter in the Mexico. And the same with many of the birds. They will fly literally north to south during the different seasons. And why is that? It's just showing us that we need to get ready for winter. Now, when my mom and dad, they grew up in the 1930s, okay? And during the 1930s, it was very difficult. In fact, my mom grew up in a family of 14. And so basically, they learned that if you were going to eat during the wintertime, you had to plant a garden. So when I was a kid, my mom and my dad, they planted a huge garden. And that garden basically supplied us with what we needed during the winter season. My wife grew up with the same type of parents, that they themselves had these large gardens. And then in the fall, what they would do is they would, prepare their preserves and get their different stocks ready for winter. I remember when we were younger, my wife and I were living in Yellowknife at the time, and we would go down to an area called Kelowna, which is in British Columbia. It's a beautiful, beautiful area. They grow fruit, and so you could get apples, and you could get peaches and pears and apricots and all kinds of different fruit. And so what we would do is we would go down and we would buy all these mason jars, and then my wife and her mom would prepare all these jars of fruit. So we would have peaches and pears and apricots and all kinds of different preserves during the winter, and we would haul them back home in our van. And it was really quite the situation. I would take all these box loads of all these different jars of peaches and pears and all these other things that were going. And that was what kept us during the winter time when we lived up north. So we didn't have to go and buy and pay expensive types of amounts of money. And that was basically what we would do. We knew that we would have to spend a certain amount of money to, of course, do the mason jars. And every year I would have to haul these mason jars back down to Kelowna so that we would have those preserves, of course, in the winter. Then, of course, we moved to BC and we never had to worry about that. Anyway, continuing on, you need to be aware that when you have that time of plenty, that time of abundance, put things aside. If you have a good job right now, the rule that many investors tell you to do is simply this: practice the 70-30 rule. What's that? 70% spend on your essentials. 10% is given to the Lord, 10% is set aside for savings, and 10% is set aside for, of course, retirement. Now, if you can't do that, even the smallest amount, $5 a day. Think about this. If you can put aside $5 a day, that is $150 a month. And by the end of the year, you have put away $1,800. If you do that over 5 years, all of a sudden you have thousands of dollars. And if you are able to do that over a certain period of time, over a series of years, and you put that investment, that thing is called compound interest. Back in the 1980s, I put $1,000 into a savings account with a particular group of people. Today, that particular savings account of $1,000 is now over $8,000. Isn't that amazing? Just $1,000 investment over time. So the simple fact is, when you have abundance, and I'm not trying to give you financial advice, I'm just telling you that when you are in that time of abundance, always put aside money for the future. In fact, Dave Ramsey, who runs, of course, is a very popular particular program on the radio station that I used to be involved. He talks about making sure that you always have an emergency fund. And secondly, try to get out of debt as quickly as possible. Debt is, I know we live in a society where debt is perfectly acceptable. In fact, right now, the big, beautiful bill that is being languishing right now in the Senate by Mr. Trump is actually adding about, $2.5 trillion to the debt of the United States. Their debt is already $37 trillion. They're never going to pay that debt back. My country of Canada, now this is an interesting fact. We had two Trudeaus in power in Canada. The first one was Pierre Elliott Trudeau. And when he took over in 1969, Canada did not have any debt. By the time he left 15 years later, Canada was in the debt for $500 billion. Then his son comes along and he comes into power in 2015. And when he left in 2025, after 10 years, he had run our debt up to $1.3 trillion. That means during his time, we went in $800 billion in debt. Now, we've only got 41 million people in Canada. That is equal to the same amount of people that live in California. So that just tells you what debt is. In Canada, for example, the average Canadian is $1.83 in debt. That means for every dollar, we are 83 cents in debt. That's what it means. So the simple fact is that the more debt that you have, the more anxiety that you have, the more stress that you have, the more opportunity to have a fight with your spouse because of that. So it's important not to have debt if it is possible. So the simple fact is, I understand sometimes you have to borrow money to be able to buy the basic necessities. I fully understand that. But don't allow that debt to accumulate and become a major problem in your life. Remember that. And that can be easily offset by, of course, practicing good stewardship. And that's what Joseph did. Joseph, during those 7 years, He got ready for the famine because he understood that life is all about feast and famine. There's going to be good things that are going to be happening to you, and then bad things that are going to happen to you. Sometimes it is because of something that you did, but 9 times out of 10, it is something that just happens to you. All of a sudden, you end up getting a bill from somewhere, and all of a sudden, you can't pay it. And you're going, how did this happen? That's because you weren't planning for the future. You didn't have an emergency fund. And a lot of families don't have emergency funds. In fact, there was a survey done just the early part of this year that found that, for example, in my province of Alberta, which happens to be the most populous, or I should say, the most prosperous uh, province in our dominion, 50% of people are living paycheck to paycheck. In the United States, it's 60% of the people are living paycheck to paycheck. That means only 4 out of every 10 Americans are actually making it and living the American dream. And it's not getting any better because of what's going on with this big, beautiful bill. In the big, beautiful bill, for example, there is a massive tax increase, which of course is tariffs. And also, as well, there is a transference of wealth from the poor to the rich. And that's really what the big beautiful bill is all about. And that's why you have this feud going on between the president and Elon Musk, because Elon Musk said this is a terrible, terrible bill. In fact, I saw a young lady on TikTok. She was reading, she put all the information from the big beautiful bill into a chat GPT, and then she read it back. And basically she said, according to chat GPT, this bill is a great grab for power and money. That's really what it said. So I thought, very interesting. Anyway, let's leave the politics alone. Let's now talk about the fact that Joseph understood that there are times where we, of course, are in abundance. So when you are in that time of abundance, in that time of prosperity, in that time where everything is working out really good, set things aside and get ready for winter, because winter is coming. Right now, where I live, it is absolutely fabulous. Last night, for example, got on my motorcycle, drove to one of the local towns that were close by, drove around my hometown, and really enjoyed a beautiful motorcycle ride. Now, I know that in December, I am not going to be able to do that. So, what am I doing? I am enjoying my summer experience because I know where I live, we have 4 seasons. And I know that, for example, when the leaves start turning in September and early October, I've got to get ready for winter because winter is going to come. It may not come until December like it did this last year, but I know that there's going to be cold. I know that there's going to be snow. And so in the fall, what do? I put my winter tires on. I get ready for winter because I know that winter is coming. I actually have a summer car and a winter car. And I know that when winter hits, we need to be ready. So you live with these certainties. And one of the certainties is good times do not last forever. So you need to be prepared when the good times are happening for the winter season, for the seasons where are not going to be famine, or it's going to be famine. So that's what Joseph did. And that's what we need to learn when we're in those times. So let me pray for you right now. Father, I have an opportunity right now to pray for people. I pray that we will practice wisdom. That was the one thing that Joseph showed beyond a shadow of a doubt, that wisdom knows that sooner or later there are going to be hard times. And I'm not trying to be negative in any way. I'm just trying to explain to people how there is an ebb in life and how it flows and how that one day everything is just working really good. There was a movie that was while you were sleeping, and there was this one scene where the dad was talking to his son, and he said, "Son, everything's good one day, and then one day everything falls apart." And the son says to him, "Dad, this is that day." And then he explains to him that he didn't want the dad's business. And so basically, we need to understand that people come into our lives, situation come into our lives, and it is both negative and positive. It was Chuck Swindoll who said that 90% of all that happens to us relies on the 10% on how we react to it. So, Father, I pray today a couple things. Number one, that we would put our trust in you. You know, it was Solomon who said this: trust the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean to your own understanding, but always acknowledge him, and he will direct your path. That is so important. So I pray today that we would put your trust in you. I've shared on this platform your provision and how that, Lord, you take care of us, even in those times where it seems, are we going to make it? I know that we can. We need to put our trust in you. Secondly, Lord, that we would live with a reality. Good times do not always last. And there are several reasons why. Number one, there are people out there who do not want to see us success or be prosper. It's really unfortunate, but there are people like that. Secondly, we have an enemy called Satan, and he is very active. He does not want to see mankind prosper in any way. So he works the situation. And then there's just life in general. Romans 8:28 says this: all things work together for good. Doesn't mean all things we face are good, but all things work together for good. We need to understand that even in the bad times, and actually, it's not in the good times that we become stronger, more resourceful, or more experienced. It's actually in the times of famine, when we are being stretched as an individual. We forget that we can be incredibly resourceful. We can forget that we can be incredibly wise, and we can learn all kinds of things. I have animals, and almost every day my animals provide me with an opportunity to be able to fix things. The other day, for example, we went away for several hours out to our son's place to spend some time with doing, family things. When we came back, my wife came to me and said, "You're going to have to fix the gate." I said, "Why's that?" She said, "The dog chewed the pickets on the gate." That's right. My dog, which we have a British bulldog, he chewed the pickets on the gate, separating him from the house. And he wanted to get in so bad that he decided he was going to be a beaver. Well, you know what? Today I have to go and fix the pickets on the gate because he chewed them. And that's, you have to deal with things. One time that same gate broke off, and so I had to fix the gate. These things happen. And you have, Mark Lowry put it this way. He says, when you live in a condominium, you have a maintenance man. When you own a house, you are the maintenance man. Either way, we need to understand that life can be very interesting, confusing, chaotic, and also hard at times. That's when we really grow. It's in the valley experiences of life that we actually find out what kind of people we are. We also discover in those time periods that we are greater than, of course, we think we are. One of the interesting things that happened just this last week, my son, who happens to be a farmer, was working on some machinery. And I looked at him, and this was a young man that I didn't think was mechanically inclined at all. And all of a sudden, I am watching him put together and fix a large piece of farm machinery. He had been doing that for a number of years. And I thought to myself, this is incredible. How did he learn all of that? Farm machinery breaks down. And if you call the farm mechanic, it is going to be very expensive. So, what do farmers do? They learn how to fix the machinery themselves. They go to where they go to have to get the parts, and then they fix it. And I'm watching my son fix this piece of complicated machinery. And I'm thinking, I said, Ryan, where did you learn how to do this? I actually said, he said, Dad, when you're a farmer, you either learn to fix it yourself or you call the mechanic, and you know that when you call the mechanic, there is going to be some downtime. And he says, we just can't afford to have downtime. So he said, I've learned to fix things. And I thought to myself, isn't that amazing? So the simple fact is that you can learn new skills. You can take your interest to a greater level. And that only happens when something negative happens to you. So, Father, I thank you today that we can become even stronger, more resourceful, and even better in a bad situation. It just depends on how we react to it. We have learned from the life of Joseph that not every season of life is good. Joseph spent 13 years as a prisoner and as a slave, and now he's in charge of the entire country. And instead of being vengeful, he got right to business, and he knew that he had a time period to get ready for the famine. I pray today that we will be wise like the ants, we'll be wise like the animals that are working right now in the summer season to get ready for winter. Not every animal hibernates, but this is an interesting lesson. Right now, in the city of Banff and in Banff National Park, there's a great big, huge grizzly bear. They call him the boss. And the boss is this giant grizzly bear that basically lives around the community of Banff. And he is the biggest grizzly bear in the country. They can see that, if you see him, you see that he has scars on his body. You can see that he has broken teeth and broken claws. And that's because he's gotten into fights with other grizzly bears because he is, of course, the top bear in the area. There's an actual story where he was hit by a freight train and he got up and walked away from, of course, the freight train. And he has become famous around the world. Well, you know what the boss is doing right now? The boss is eating berries and going around finding his summer sustenance because he knows that around late October, he is going to be going into his den and he's going to be sleeping during the winter season. That's what grizzly bears and bears do. Well, of course, that's why he's fattening up. And right now, things are starting to, there are different things that bears eat, and he is eating those things because he knows that over the winter season, he is going to be losing about 100 pounds because he'll be sleeping. So that's why he's fattening up. That's why he's going down to the local river. And that's why he's going, to different parts of the Banff National Park to basically get ready for winter. So Lord, help us to recognize that when the summer season is on, when the season of prosperity and abundance is happening, let's get ready for the times of famine and for the times of winter, because we have those winter seasons. We have the summer seasons. That's what creation teaches us. So let's be wise in doing that. And I pray for those that people would be wise along that line and understand that. That's what I'm praying for today, that we would understand how seasons work, how life works, and how that life can be both good and bad. But even in the bad times, they can be good. It just depends on how we react to it. So, Lord, I thank you for this time together. I thank you for the lessons that we have learned, and I thank you for your blessings in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, tomorrow we're going to talk about Joseph and how that Joseph found himself now in the time of famine. And there are some very specific things that are happening. Joseph's family is going to enter into the picture, and Joseph is going to have some interesting reactions. So, my name is Robert Dean Steele. Thank you so much for joining me. God bless, and have yourself a great and godly day. Oh, and by the way, before I say goodbye, one quick thing, and that is that every day I put on this particular channel a series of shorts, and that is anywhere from 30 seconds to 1 minute. I give you what I call sage advice. So check that out as well.